Hello everyone, I'm Ausyellow and welcome back to Spaceflight Simulator. Unfortunately, given the time I recorded these videos, I wasn't talking in them, so I had to do a voiceover. In the previous recording session, I managed to get to the moon and land, and then try to land in, fly over to 3 different locations. And I was able to successfully then orbit the moon after completing that mission, and I just needed to get picked up and returned to Earth safely. I made an attempt at that, but the attempt was very poorly done, so I just said eventually I'm going to redo the entire thing, the entire mission from start to finish, redesigning the rocket. The basic premise of it is that RCS was what I used to fly to the 3 different locations, and then what you can do is once you have completed that mission, you can then fly onto or get into orbit and then send another rocket out there to collect the orbit or like the probe that is in orbit and then land on Earth safely. It's a fairly simple process. Somehow this particular mission gave me moon orbit. Fair enough. Once again, the very first rocket I designed had a very pitiful thrust to weight ratio. Um, so I decided to redesign it, and now it looks an awful lot like the rocket used in Austin Powers. Once in orbit, this is where the fun begins. We then need to find the transfer window, burn till we get enough velocity to impact the moon. That was initially the idea, and then once we time warp over there, we can slow down and begin the descent onto the lunar surface. After landing in the Sea of Tranquility, we then take off and fly over to Copernicus crater. I believe that's how you pronounce it anyway. What you want to do when building the parabola in the map, you want to overshoot it so that when you turn around and reduce the horizontal velocity, you sort of land on top of the landmark as well. One thing that is quite useful is saving or making quick saves, just in case something goes wrong. I do this especially in the Venus mission, which we'll get onto later. For our final destination, the lower level runs out of fuel. Not much of a problem anyway, because we still have the RCS level. And I do believe at this point I became a little bit confident because we had very sufficient fuel after landing in the ocean of storms to fly straight home, which we can do, but there is a docking port at the other side of the rocket, which I thought for a moment was placed backwards, but that's just there just in case we run out of fuel and we need to send a refueling rocket up there to catch it, which will be perfectly fine anyway. After doing it, almost without a doubt, we were able to position the orbit within the atmosphere, or the periapsis within the atmosphere, and then literally just wait, separate, and then land the probe on the planet. Mission accomplished. And that right there is how to get the moon tour. I think it'll be a bit more interesting when we have to do the Mars tour, but I'm working on it. Actually, I say that, I'm not. I've been too busy playing modded Minecraft again. I don't know how that happened, and I haven't made any spaceflight simulator videos pretty much since the Venus mission, so it'll be a while before more content is posted on the Venus mission. Or, well, I mean, on SFS in general, which is a bit unfortunate, but more content will definitely be coming because I do love this game no matter what. Now, the mission to Venus is quite possibly one of my favourite missions, despite it being incredibly difficult, even though I have done it before. This is a modified. It's a Endurance 2 rocket, hence all of the heat shields around the main capsule. So the goal here is just to basically get into orbit, reach escape velocity, and then try to enter the sphere of influence of Venus. Unfortunately, at Venus, I was very, very, very low on fuel, so I had to use the sort of reserve fuel, which I need to use to take off from the planet once I've landed there. But the whole point here is to aerobrake, which is to position the periapsis slightly within the atmosphere of Venus, which is 10 kilometers higher up than the atmosphere on Earth and is also much more dense as well. And this is incredibly noticeable when trying to escape. So the whole point of aerobraking is to just run through the atmosphere, hence the heat shields, which pretty much absorb all the heat, and slow us down, thus decreasing the height of the apoapsis. And it is incredibly difficult to keep the rocket straight in the atmosphere as well, so I kept saving here and there just in case like the rocket spins round and then destroys itself, because this is very difficult. And I can't remember how many laps I had to do around Venus. It was ridiculous, but after a while you eventually make the orbit small enough such that the apoapsis winds up inside the atmosphere and then you can just land as is. Once in the atmosphere, we can then remove the fairings and activate the 4 aerodynamic parachute type things that are positioned on the side of the rocket. I decided to only do the top 2 because if I do all 4, it does make the rocket incredibly unstable and very difficult to sort of pilot, I guess. Then, after a very long series of attempts of trying to make the rocket stand up correctly, this is why you quick save. Eventually, I managed to get the rocket in a somewhat stable position. I really didn't want to use too much fuel, because if I did use all the fuel, I won't be able to escape the planet. And another thing as well, you don't use the top parachute that's attached to the capsule. The reason why you don't use that one is because you need to use that one when you return the shuttle back to Earth. Now it is just a simple process of finalising the orbit, and I am surprised I was able to make it that far with that much fuel I had left. But the next step will be to make the quick save and then design a refueling shuttle to go over there and collect the shuttle that landed on the surface of Venus, which is actually quite simple. And it took me 3 different launches to get the whole thing up and running. I think next time I can do it in one by having all 3 rockets next to each other and sort of attached and launching them at the exact same time. So one thing I was very quick to notice when launching these rockets was that they did have a slightly lower thrust to weight ratio when taking off from Earth, but they were still able to make a pretty quick and high apex by comparison to Venus. Either way, 3 rockets were launched. One of them was the main probe, or the main shuttle even, and then the other 2 were refueling rockets with a distinguishable colour, shall we say, for to symbolise that it is the refueling part. They were connected to the same shuttle. The fuel was roughly balanced on all of them, and then we just simply fly over to Venus. And if we run out of fuel, we can, well, in the main tank, we can then transfer it to that main tank with the side tanks. Now, flying towards Venus was incredibly simple, but one thing that we couldn't do once we were in the sphere of influence of Venus was aerobrake to establish the orbit and reduce the apoapsis. So we actually had to burn fuel to do that. And I could have done the next step an awful lot more efficiently, which was finding the transfer window and rendezvousing with the shuttle, but it was just a complete mess. Eventually I caught up with the shuttle, and we were able to dock in the, in the sphere of influence of Venus, I guess. So now it's just a case of returning home, and that is a little bit difficult with the quantity of fuel I have left, given that I wasted a fairly large quantity, but it is still quite easily doable. Then at the very end, you transfer the rocket to the fuel to the remaining piece of the shuttle that landed on Venus, and then you use that to for re-entry, I guess. It's also quite completely unnecessary to burn fuel to slow us down and then detach while still technically burning. Just completely detach. The heat shield and the remaining shuttle is more than enough to return to Earth safely and land. And that right there is how to do Moon Tour and how to get to Venus returning home safely. Let me know if you want to see the full footage. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe as usual. Thanks for watching.